As a fitness professional, you know the joy of helping others, and you know it's more than just fitness. We're training the whole person. Wellness coaching provides expertise that goes beyond fitness and nutrition. It's a holistic approach to helping others become their best selves while reaching their goals. To us, there's no greater joy than that. Join the fitness leader. Become a fitness leader. Become a certified wellness coach. Go to nasm.org/wellness.
Well, hello there, listeners, and welcome to this week's episode of the Better Than Fine podcast. I'm your host, Darlene Marshall, and while the title of this week's episode is Benevolent Childhood Experiences, I do want to give you a heads up that we allude to negative childhood experiences here in the beginning, and there is a brief mention of suicidal ideation. And so I always want you to know, prioritize your well-being and your headspace, because while that's not really what this episode is about, I don't want you to get caught off guard because of the title and the show, and you get the idea. All right, let's get to it. If you've ever been to therapy, and I certainly have, you've probably talked about your childhood. Again, been there, done that. And maybe they asked you about things like your parents' divorce, or if anybody in the house was a drinker, or if there was any kind of abuse or neglect. Not the fun stuff, right? Well, some of what that therapist might have been trying to tease out, something called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Scale, or the ACEs. It's 10 questions that are meant to assess the stability or the potentially damaging environment of your home and your childhood and how you grew up. Back in the 90s, Kaiser Permanente did this big analysis, huge data sets. We've talked about big data set analysis on the show before. And essentially what this big old study, landmark study, showed was that people who had higher ACEs scores, so they had more adverse childhood experiences, were more likely to have all kinds of things go sideways as adults. They were more likely to have these negative outcomes down the line. And the theory at the time was that these negative things affect the development of the brain and the nervous system, and that those people went on to be more at risk for bad stuff down the line. So to give you an idea of the kinds of things we're talking about, let's say that you were somebody with an ACEs score of 1 because all the other stuff was fine, but your parents got divorced while you were a kid. Well, that person, so the way the question is actually phrased is, did you lose a parent through divorce, abandonment, death, or any other reason? All right, that person with the 1, everything else was fine, but that happened. They have a 19.6 greater chance of developing a chronic illness in their adulthood. Okay, if you had an ACEs score of 2, that jumps to 36%. Right? So we can make these correlations between long-term outcomes and things that happened as a kid. Let me give you a few other, maybe more extreme examples. So a child with an ACEs of 1 had a 28% chance of being bullied, more than 2, and that jumps to 46%. Right? So out of 10 things, if 2 of them were sideways, you had a 50-50 chance of being somebody who got bullied at school. And we knew that kids who get bullied tend to have these long-term negative outcomes. So adults with ACEs of 4 or more, this is where things get really hairy. So more than a 1,200, so 1,200% increase likelihood to have attempted suicide. 1,000% increase in their likelihood to have used injectable drugs, 460% increase in likelihood of having a recent depressive episode, 390% increase in the chance for lung disease, probably because you were more likely to be a smoker or have grown up in a smoker household. You get the idea. Adults with an ACEs of 2 or more have a 400% increase in the likelihood that they self-report as an alcoholic. At least 5 of the leading 10 causes of premature death in the United States have a direct link to a high ACEs score. You get the idea. High ACEs is real bad. Personally, about 18 months ago, having read all of this research about the adverse outcomes of high ACEs scores, having vaguely kind of known that some of those things happen in my life, had a therapist recommend that I take the ACEs assessment, and the number in itself was very upsetting. But it did get me thinking, but why? Like, if I have a high ACEs score, why do so many of these risky behaviors that I'm apparently so incredibly prone to, do I not engage in? And neither do my brothers. Not that we're perfect, like, certainly we have our maladaptive coping, but we don't have diabetes and we don't have lung disease and we aren't smokers, and you get the idea. So, what gives? Well, recently I was reading a case study and I came across a phrase that I'd never heard before: Benevolent Childhood Experiences Scale. I'm like, wait a second. Benevolent Childhood Experiences Scale. That sounds like the most positive psychology thing that I would ever have heard of. And in all of my work in well being and wellness and fitness, I've never come across this idea of benevolent childhood experiences. So, what did I do? You know exactly what I did. I ran off to Google and I pumped those words in, and Yahtzee, I came across this idea, which is why I want to tell you about it today. If you've listened to the show for a while, you know that one of the pillars of working in well being is that the absence of the bad isn't the same as the presence of the good. We could mitigate all of the bad stuff. You could go to therapy, we could dump out the can of worms, and now you just got an empty can, right? We've taken out the bad stuff, but what do we want to put in the can? And we want to put the good stuff in where the worms used to be. And the absence of the bad isn't the same as presence of the good. I can mitigate for all of the adverse experiences I want, and that's not the same as having had the good stuff. So while ACEs is telling you potential roots of problems, the BCE unearths the best of childhood, and the insights that I got having dug into that through the positive psychology lens. And that's why I want to tell you all about it today. You're listening to the Better Than Fine podcast. I'm your host, Darlene Marshall, and I am here to share with you today all about benevolent childhood experiences, the BCEs. The earliest reference that I could find to BCEs published was in 2018, led by Angela. I'm gonna hurt her name here, Narayan. Angela, I hope I got that right. And she's going to be getting an email from me soon because I'm really excited to invite her onto the show. So, Angela Narayan, associate professor at the University of Denver. So, compared to ACEs, which we've got the Kaiser Permanente landmark study in the early 90s, you've got decades of research digging into the worst of us. BCE is pretty new. And so ACEs shows all of these downsides, but unfortunately, we don't have a landmark Kaiser Permanente meta-analysis. We don't have big data sets on the awesome stuff, but man, we really should. And I also believe that it's coming based off of the motivation I've seen, the momentum I've seen, excuse me, while I was digging into BCEs. So there's a few studies that show a bit of this magic, but just based out of positive psychology research on things like resilience or post-traumatic growth, we know that focusing on the upsides, building optimism, looking to the positives has a momentum and building and upward spiral priming effect. So let's take a look. I know this isn't how we do our normal study episodes, but there are a few studies that I want to talk about because I've been so excited about this concept. So the first is one that isn't even fully published yet. I just got the pretext. It's going to become available in October, so I haven't been able to read the full study yet, just the abstract and the outcomes, because that's what's currently available. But it's called A Systematic Review of Positive Childhood Experiences and Adult Outcomes, Promotive and Protective Processes for Resilience in the Context of Childhood Adversity, end quote. And essentially, what this study's current outcomes have purported to say, we'll see when it comes out in October and I get to actually read the study, is that your adverse childhood experiences and your positive childhood experiences function independently. And while there is sub-evidence that the people who have a high presence of the good stuff tend to have lower of the bad stuff, that's not necessarily the case. But I think what's even cooler than that they function independently, like you can have the bad stuff and you can still also have the good stuff, right? They're not one or the other, is this quote. Here we go. Quote, higher levels of PCEs were associated with outcomes reflecting mental health, psychosocial functioning, physical health and health behaviors, and psychosocial stress. Most studies found direct promotive effects of PCEs for more favorable outcomes. End quote. So essentially what that all is saying is it's not just that the good stuff like mitigates the negatives of the bad. No, 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 no. It functions independently. The benevolent childhood experiences, the good stuff in childhood actually creates the good. I think that is hugely positive as a concept because if we've spent the last few decades in therapeutic practice, in our self work, looking at all of the adverse childhood experiences, we're staring down the barrel of the negatives. And we know from work and helplessness that when we do that, we drive adverse outcomes. But wait, we could reframe it to look at the good stuff and lift people up. And there's more evidence for that. So this study actually has been published. We're going to talk about it right now. Study's title is Positive Childhood Experiences Predict Less Psychopathology and Stress in Pregnant Women with Childhood Adversity, a pilot study for the Benevolent Childhood Experiences Scale. End of title. So essentially, this is that 2018 first publication of the BCEs. And what this study was is a group of 101 pregnant women of mixed ethnic and socioeconomic background, right? 101 very different pregnant American women. They have the ones with high levels of BCEs predicted less PTSD and stressful life events above and beyond what their ACEs score was. So let me put that another way. The people who had really high good stuff, it didn't matter if they also had really high bad stuff. And that's what that systematic review that's coming out later this year is claiming to have found, is that in the studies we currently have of the good stuff in childhood, it's showing that even if you have the bad stuff, the presence of the good stuff is actually more powerful. I think that is incredible. You're listening to the Better Than Fine podcast. I'm your host, Darlene Marshall, and I'm sharing with you all about Benevolent Childhood Experiences Scale, all about the current understanding of the way that the good stuff, the positive stuff in childhood lifts us up in adulthood, and how do we use this information? All right, let's break down this assessment right now. It's 10 questions that start with this concept of during the first 18 years of your life. So from birth until you are legally an adult, yes or no to these 10 things. Did you have at least one caregiver with whom you felt safe? That's number one, at least one caregiver whom you felt safe with. Number two, did you have at least one good friend? So you got a caregiver, you got a friend. Number three, did you have beliefs that gave you comfort? Now, quick side note, Jared Clifton, positive psychology practitioner at the University of Pennsylvania, he's got this incredible set of constructs that he's currently building the body of research around called primal world beliefs. It's essentially like, what are our foundational beliefs about the world and how does that shape our reality and our outcomes? And I think it's so interesting that Jared's work is actually pretty new, but this beliefs thing was already in this scale going back to 2018 at least. So did you have beliefs that gave you comfort? Number four, did you like school? I know I did, clearly, big old nerd. Number five, did you have at least one teacher who cared about you? I think of Mrs. Fancher in the second grade. Lovely person. Number six, did you have good neighbors? I know I did. I immediately think of Shirley, who lived next door to my grandparents. She would watch me sometime. She didn't have any front teeth, and she said Paschetti. It was very funny. But she would make me crochet me a blanket every year for my birthday. There you go. Number seven, was there an adult who was not a parent or a caregiver who could provide you with support or advice? Somebody who could give you guidance. Number eight, did you have the opportunities to have a good time? I like the way that one is phrased. Number nine, did you like yourself? and feel comfortable with yourself? And number 10, did you have a predictable home routine like regular meals or regular bedtime? So these 10 questions represent 10 positive experiences from childhood that the current evidence shows the more of them that you have, the more resilient you are against corroding factors in life. So, independent from ACEs, independent from how high that negative score is the more of the good stuff you have, the less likely you are to be sick, to not take care of your body, to not take care of your mental health. And so, to me, as a positive psychology practitioner, this drives home something that we already knew, right? The absence of the bad isn't the same as the presence of the good. And it spells it out for us in such a beautiful way. And I'll just say personally, since even discovering that this scale existed, so 18 months ago, I was told, take this ACEs assessment. I got a really high score, the kind of high score that, like, when I've shared it with other mental health professionals, one person went, whoa. I was like, yeah, caught you off guard, huh? And I couldn't understand why. Well, I went and took the Benevolent Childhood Experiences, and it was 10 out of 10. I have all 10 of these. So every time you've listened to me talk on the show about, like, I was diagnosed with complex PTSD, I have trauma, I have this, I have that. Yeah, those things are all true. But you know what else is true? I got a 10 out of 10 of my Benevolent Childhood Experiences scale. And to me, that explains so much of the resilience, the grit, all of the things that I have seen in myself demonstrated in a journey of life that, yeah, it began with some abuse, some neglect, poverty, real challenges that the adults in my life were trying to weather when I was growing up. And I don't fault them for it. They literally did the best they could do. And if the best you can do is all you can do, that's all we can do, right? But the flip of that was the things that they did instill in me. Yeah, I definitely had caregivers I felt safe with. That's number one. I had more than one good friend. I had beliefs that gave me comfort. I love school. Number 5, I just mentioned Mrs. Fancher. There were others. Number 6, great neighbors, Shirley and the Piscetti. Number 7, I think of the adults that I could get advice from, my coaches, especially my basketball coach, Walt Dorman. Um, Opportunities to have a good time. My family's a lot of things, and one of them is really fun. Number 9, did I like myself, feel comfortable with myself? I think it depends at what age, right? Being a 6'1" teenage girl is weird, but okay, I like myself. And predictable home routine. Yeah, at times. And so I think in all of this talk lately, in the wellness space, in the mental health space, in the self work space, whatever we want to label this thing that we do, there's a lot of talk about healing, right? And trauma and regulation. And yes, all of that matters. I'm not saying that it doesn't matter. But at some point, I believe my personal journey, my work as a coach, work with clients, my friends, my family, at some point, I believe that we each have a moment that we can decide that we are going to pivot from survive to thrive. We are going to turn the corner where it's not about healing necessarily. It's not about emptying the can of worms. It's about, what am I going to build into thriving? What am I going to put in the empty can that I've cleaned all the way out to fill it with the good stuff? So we got to stop at some point excavating the narrative of everything bad that happened and deciding to cultivate a positive future. And I think it's also important to recognize that maybe you didn't have a 10 out of 10 on that BCE questionnaire. Maybe it wasn't a 10, but that speaks to the concept of reparenting, that each of us has the opportunity to use the neuroplasticity that we have to invest in going back in ourselves and saying, okay, little kid version of me, I'll be the safe space for myself, or I'll seek someone out that is safe. Cultivating the situations and that validate and create those experiences now, and then letting yourself feel them. So, how do you find people that are safe? Can you build at least one good friendship? Can you cultivate beliefs now that give you comfort? Learn things that you like. Find people that you can learn from that you know care about you. If you need somebody, reach out. Cultivating positive relationships with your neighbors and your peers and your coworkers. Uh, Finding people that you can trust that will give you advice and mentorship. Having a good time. Maybe not with the substances that would be dangerous and detrimental to your health. And I think one of the most important ones for myself in all of the journey of the self work of the last 20 years has been that even when I look back and I feel a sense of regret on some of the decisions that I have made, I look at who I am now and I can say, man, I really like this person. I'm right with her. So even if I wish that those things didn't go the way that they went, I must have learned something important to end up here. And to be able to hang your hat on, yeah, but I like me now, so it turned out okay. And if you don't feel that way, that's the work right now, right? How do I cultivate someone that feels like a positive space to be with, be in, be of? And as I'm wrapping up this episode, because I know there's plenty of people that listen to this show that are parents or caregivers themselves, how can we cultivate these experiences in the lives of the people that we are responsible for shaping their reality? Are you the caregiver that feels safe? Are you making sure that your young people have positive friendships and the opportunity to build them? Are you instilling them in beliefs that are comforting and stable, or beliefs that make the world feel threatening and terrifying and anxiety provoking? Are you promoting an environment where it's okay to like school and you're not just a big old nerd? Or you are a big old nerd, but that's because being a big old nerd is awesome. I'll just say from this side of the fence. Um, are you being a good neighbor to the kid that lives nearby you? Are you providing opportunities for advice and support, right? All of us as adults have the opportunity to be that person in another kid's life, whether you are their legal guardian or not. Um, and at the risk of sounding preachy here as we wrap this up, I think that even if you are someone who grew up, I like to say, a certain kind of way. Yeah, I grew up a certain kind of way. If you listen to the show long enough, you know what I mean. Or if you just listen to this episode, I feel like I just unpacked a lot of baggage for you. But if you're someone who grew up a certain kind of way, that means that you're sensitive to that fact that these things exist in the world on the adverse side. And recently, I was volunteering with Travis Manion Foundation, and one of the alumni of the program was there speaking. And he said, yeah, as a young person, I went to school for X, Y, and Z, and it's because I was committed. I was going to change the world. And he was saying it as a joke on himself, like, ha ha ha, idealistic young me. But it gave me pause because I do think that the world doesn't get saved all at once by one person with a magic wand. The world changes a little bit at a time, individually and collectively, moment to moment. And to unpack that a little bit, it's not that anyone's going to come along and magically save all of us. It's that each of us is going to accept the responsibility. Oh, I'm the adult in the room now. And it's my turn to try to make things better instead of worse. And the more and more and more of us that do that, that's how the world changes together. And so if we roll the tape back to these 10 things, how can we cultivate more of them, not just in our lives for ourselves, but once we're stable and we've got the level up, how do we cultivate them in the lives of others for all of us? Yeah, big ideas here on the show today. Of course, I want to hear your thoughts and your feedback. And if you find this interesting, if you think this is cool, let me know, because I think there's a lot of interesting places this could go. And I would love to do more episodes on it if you want to learn more. So I want to hear your feedback. You can email me. It's info@darlene.coach. And not just about the show. If you've questions about anything, don't hesitate to reach out. I'm on Instagram. That's also darlene.coach. That's also my website. And you can find me on LinkedIn as well. Now, if you're a fan of the show, well, I hope that you have already subscribed. And if you haven't yet, go ahead and do it. If you're watching this on YouTube, give it a like, give it a comment. You know that those little nudges is how the algorithm gives us the level up. Thank you to everyone who's written us a review. And if you haven't done that, it would be a great help to us. And if you share the show, please don't hesitate to tag me. I'd love to hear your questions, comments, concerns, thoughts, and feelings. Thank you so much. Take good care of yourselves and be well.